I knew my husband's family didn't respect me, but I never thought they'd have the audacity to hand me a $20,000 vacation bill like I was their personal ATM. And when I refused, they called me a selfish gold digger. But what they didn't know, I had already set up the ultimate payback, and they were about to regret ever underestimating me. My name is Mia, and for years I tolerated my in-laws treating me like a second-class citizen. The disrespect began subtly at first, small comments here and there, judgmental glances when they thought I wasn't looking. But over time, it became impossible to ignore the blatant disregard they had for me as a person. I still remember the first Thanksgiving I spent with them. I arrived at their suburban home, arms laden with homemade dishes I'd spent 2 days preparing. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, barely glanced at my contributions before directing me to the kitchen to help with the real cooking. That should have been my first warning sign. By the end of the evening, I had cooked half the meal, served everyone, and cleaned the entire kitchen while my husband and his siblings lounged in the living room watching football. Not once did I receive a simple thank you. This pattern continued at every family gathering. Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, it didn't matter what the occasion was. I was expected to cook, serve, and clean, while being treated as if I were the hired help rather than family. My husband, Daniel, never seemed to notice the imbalance, or if he did, he certainly never spoke up about it. What made the situation even more frustrating was that I was the only one with a stable job. I had worked my way up at a financial consulting firm over the past decade, building a respectable career in financial stability. Daniel worked sporadically as a freelance graphic designer, but his income was unpredictable at best. Yet somehow I was expected to cover dinner, gifts, and everything in between whenever we got together with his family. Meanwhile, Daniel's siblings, Sarah and Jake, both in their late 20s, refused to work at all. They called traditional employment capitalist oppression, while still living off their parents' dwindling retirement fund. Sarah fancied herself an Instagram influencer, though her follower count never seemed to break 1,000. Jake was perpetually working on a screenplay that no one had ever actually seen a page of. Both lived rent-free in their parents' basement, contributing nothing while criticizing everyone who had the audacity to participate in the workforce. The hypocrisy was staggering. They would lecture me about the evils of capitalism while wearing designer clothes and using the latest iPhones, all funded by their parents or, increasingly, by me. When Daniel and I would visit, they'd inevitably find a way to mention something they desperately needed but couldn't afford: a new laptop for Jake's writing, a ring light for Sarah's Instagram career, and Daniel, ever the peacekeeper, would offer to help, which meant I would be footing the bill. I tried to discuss this with Daniel multiple times, but he always dismissed my concerns. "That's just how they are," he'd say, as if that explanation justified their behavior. Family helps family. But it seemed like the help only ever flowed in one direction, from my wallet to their hands. Over time, I began to withdraw from family gatherings. I'd make up excuses about work emergencies or schedule conflicts to avoid spending time with people who clearly didn't value my presence beyond what I could provide for them. Daniel would go alone, returning with stories about how everyone missed me, though I doubted the sincerity of their sentiment. Then came the final straw. It happened on a Sunday afternoon during what was supposed to be a casual family lunch at Eleanor and Richard's house. I had reluctantly agreed to attend, hoping that perhaps things might be different this time. How naive I was. The lunch itself was typical. I cook while Eleanor supervised, occasionally pointing out how I was chopping the vegetables wrong or adding too much salt to the pasta sauce. Daniel and his siblings were in the backyard, supposedly setting up the patio table, but mostly just drinking beer and laughing. By the time we sat down to eat, I was already exhausted and irritated. Then, as I was serving dessert, a homemade tiramisu that had taken me hours to prepare, Eleanor cleared her throat and placed a thick envelope on the table beside my plate. "Mia, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we've been planning a family vacation to Bora Bora. It's going to be absolutely magical, the perfect bonding experience." I nodded politely, wondering why she was telling me this in such a formal manner. Then she slid the envelope closer to me. "Here are all the details. We've selected the very best options: first-class flights, luxury accommodations, the works. We figured since you're such a good little housewife, in addition to having that fancy job of yours, You wouldn't mind taking care of the expenses." I nearly dropped the dessert plate I was holding. "Excuse me?" Eleanor continued as if she hadn't noticed my shock. "It's about $20,000 all in. We've already made some tentative bookings, so if you could handle payment by the end of the week, that would be wonderful." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Sarah, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up with a smirk. "Well, you make the most money. It's only fair you pitch in." Pitch in? They wanted me to cover the entire trip. I opened the envelope and scanned the itinerary they had so thoughtfully planned without any input from me. First-class round-trip flights for 6 people, Daniel, me, Sarah, Jake, Eleanor, and Richard. 2 weeks at a luxury overwater bungalow resort in Bora Bora. Daily spa treatments and excursions. Yacht rental for deep-sea fishing. Private beachside dining experiences. And the list went on. The total came to just over $20,000, and they expected me to pay for all of it. Not just my share, everyone's. I turned to Daniel, expecting him to shut it down immediately. Instead, he just shrugged and gave me that boyish smile that used to melt my heart, but now made my blood boil. "Oh, babe, you can afford it," he said casually, as if he were asking me to pick up milk on the way home. "Think of it as an investment in family memories." That's when I realized I wasn't just married to a coward. I was married to a parasite. And I was surrounded by an entire family of them. For a moment I considered throwing the envelope back in Eleanor's face and walking out, but something stopped me. A plan began forming in my mind. A plan that would teach them all a lesson they desperately needed to learn. So I smiled and said, "Of course, I'll handle everything." They cheered, thinking they had won. Eleanor hugged me stiffly, whispering, "I knew you were a team player." Sarah immediately started talking about the Instagram content she would create. Jake wondered aloud if he might meet a movie producer at the resort. And Daniel, my husband, simply squeezed my hand and went back to his beer, not noticing the cold determination in my eyes. What they didn't know was that I had other plans. The next day, I called the travel agent listed on the itinerary and made some adjustments. I confirmed all the bookings under their names, not mine. I provided my credit card for initial deposits but made it clear that final payment would be handled differently. The agent assured me everything was set, and I thanked her for her assistance. Over the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I showed excitement when Eleanor sent me links to activities in Bora Bora. I nodded appreciatively when Sarah talked about the perfect outfits she was packing. I listened patiently as Jake explained how the tropical setting would inspire his writing, and I reassured Daniel repeatedly that yes, I had taken care of everything. 3 days before their departure, I canceled my credit card and reported it stolen. I then contacted my bank and froze the joint account I shared with Daniel, citing suspicious activity. I opened a new account at a different bank and transferred the majority of my savings into it. Money I had earned through years of hard work, while my husband and his family took advantage of my generosity. The morning of their flight, I kissed Daniel goodbye and wished him and his family a wonderful trip. I told him I was disappointed about having to miss it due to the last-minute work emergency I had invented, but that I was glad they could still go and enjoy themselves. He promised to send photos and said they would miss me. I smiled and waved as his parents' car pulled away from our driveway, taking my husband and his family to the airport. And then I waited. The call came about 10 hours later. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying a glass of wine, and the silence of a house empty of my husband's presence, when my phone lit up with Daniel's number. "Mia," his voice was panicked. "Something's wrong with the reservations. When we got to the airport, they said the flights were canceled." I feigned confusion and concern. "That's strange. Let me check my emails and see what happened." "No need," he said, frustration evident in his tone. "Dad already handled it. He had to pay for new tickets. Economy, not first class. But we're on our way now. Can you make sure the hotel is confirmed? We'll arrive at around 2 a.m. local time, and we'll be exhausted." "Of course," I said soothingly. "Have a safe flight. Love you." I didn't check any emails. I didn't call the hotel. I simply went to bed, knowing exactly what would happen next. The real chaos began a day later. I woke up to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages, all increasingly frantic. I smiled as I scrolled through them. 7, 8:32 a.m. Mia, the hotel has no record of our reservation. Call me ASAP. 8:14 a.m. We've been waiting in the lobby for hours. What the hell is going on? 9:05 a.m. Mom is having a meltdown. Dad's credit card is maxed out. We need your help now. My mother-in-law had even left a voicemail, her voice shrill with anger and panic. MIA, why did the reservations disappear? We're stranded in the middle of nowhere with no place to stay. Call me back immediately. I took my time responding. I waited until mid-afternoon before calling Daniel back, making sure they had plenty of time to stew in their predicament. Oh, I said sweetly when he demanded an explanation. There must have been a bank issue. My card was compromised last week and I had to cancel it. I thought the travel agent had processed everything already. Daniel's voice was strained. Well, can you fix it? We're literally stranded here. The cheapest hotel we could find is $400 a night, and Dad had to put it on his emergency credit card. We need you to transfer money right away. I'm trying, I lied, but there seems to be a hold on our joint account too. The bank is investigating some suspicious activity. It might take a few days to sort out. Sarah grabbed the phone from Daniel. She was crying, her voice hiccuping between words. We already checked in at the hotel. We're stuck. There are no return flights available for under $2,000 per person. That's terrible, I said, trying to sound sympathetic while suppressing my satisfaction. Have you tried calling your credit card companies for emergency funds? We don't have credit cards, Sarah screeched. You know that. Indeed I did. Sarah and Jake had both destroyed their credit years ago, maxing out cards on frivolous purchases and never making payments. And while Eleanor and Richard had credit cards, they were already at their limits from years of supporting their adult children. What about the return flights? I asked innocently. Those should still be confirmed, right? There was a pause, and I could hear Sarah conferring with the others. Then Daniel was back on the line, his voice deadly quiet. Mia, did you ever actually book our return flights? I gasped dramatically. Of course I did. At least, I thought I did. Let me check my confirmation emails. After a moment of pretend searching, I delivered the final blow. Oh, no. It looks like with all the confusion with my card being canceled, the return flights were never confirmed. I'm so sorry. I had, in fact, only paid for their one-way flights to Bora Bora. There were no hotel reservations, no return flights, no spending money arranged. They were truly marooned in one of the most expensive tourist destinations in the world, with no backup plan. The call devolved into chaos after that, shouting, crying, accusations. I held the phone away from my ear, letting them vent their anger and frustration. When they finally quieted down, I promised to do everything I could to help, knowing full well I would do nothing of the sort. Over the next 2 days, I ignored most of their calls and messages. I replied occasionally with updates about my ongoing conversations with the bank and vague promises that I was working on solutions. In reality, I was at home, packing my essential belongings and preparing for what would come next. After 2 days of pure panic, they finally reached a breaking point. Daniel called, more desperate than angry now. Mia, please, we're in serious trouble here. Mom and Dad have completely maxed out their credit cards, just paying for the hotel and food. We can't afford to stay here another night, let alone fly home. You have to help us. I wish I could, I said, infusing my voice with false regret. But I still can't access our joint account, and my new card hasn't arrived yet. Can't you wire money from your personal account? He pleaded. And there it was. The admission I had been waiting for. Daniel knew I had a personal account, one he had no access to. He had never shown interest in my finances before, content to let me handle everything while he benefited from my hard work. But now, when he was desperate, he suddenly remembered that I had resources of my own. I'll see what I can do, I promised emptily. In the meantime, maybe you should all look for temporary work, there to cover expenses. I hear the tourist industry is always hiring. Daniel laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. Mom and Dad are in their 60s, and Sarah and Jake have never had jobs. Well, I said coolly, there's a first time for everything. Whether out of desperation or actually taking my suggestion, Sarah did indeed find work at a beachside restaurant waiting tables for wealthy tourists, the very lifestyle she had once mocked as servitude to capitalism. Jake, after much complaining, got hired as a beach attendant, setting up chairs and umbrellas for hotel guests. Eleanor and Richard, too proud to work service jobs, stayed in their hotel room, subsisting on the cheapest food they could find and calling everyone they knew back home, begging for loans. It took them nearly 2 weeks to scrape together enough money for economy flights home. 2 weeks of manual labor, humiliation, and the harsh reality of what life was like without someone else, namely, me, footing the bill for their entitled lifestyle. When they finally returned, sunburned, exhausted, and furious, I was ready for them. I had moved most of my belongings into a new apartment, leaving behind only what I didn't need or want. I had consulted with a divorce attorney and had papers drawn up, waiting for Daniel's signature. He stormed into the house, followed by his equally angry family. They had clearly spent the entire flight home working themselves into a righteous rage, ready to confront me about my negligence and betrayal. Daniel found me in the living room, calmly reading a book. "What the hell, Mia?" he exploded. "Do you have any idea what we went through because of you?" I closed my book slowly and looked up at him. "Yes, actually, I have a very good idea." "It was a nightmare," Sarah chimed in, her skin peeling from sunburn across her nose and cheeks. "I had to work like a common servant. People treated me like I was nothing." "How terrible," I said flatly. "Being treated like you're nothing. I can't imagine what that feels like." Eleanor stepped forward, her face twisted with anger. "If this is some kind of joke or revenge, it's gone too far. We could have been stranded there forever." "Just like I've been stranded in this family forever," I countered, "expected to pay for everything, cook everything, clean everything, and never receive so much as a thank you in return." They all started talking at once, a cacophony of excuses and accusations. Daniel tried to grab my arm, but I stepped away from him, reaching into my bag and pulling out a thick envelope, not unlike the one Eleanor had handed me with the vacation details just weeks before. "Oh," I said, interrupting their tirade, "since you're used to living off my money, let's see how you do without it." I handed Daniel the divorce papers. His face paled as he flipped through them, recognition dawning slowly. "You can't be serious," he whispered. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I replied. "I've already moved out. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing our assets, though there isn't much to divide, is there, since I paid for everything." Eleanor gasped. "You planned this? The vacation, the stranding? It was all deliberate." I smiled for the first time since they had entered the house. "Think of it as an investment in family memories. Isn't that what Daniel called it?" Jake lunged forward, pointing an accusatory finger in my face. "You'll regret this. Daniel will take you for everything you have in the divorce." I laughed then, genuinely amused. With what leverage? The prenup he signed? The fact that I've paid for 90% of our life together? The evidence I have of him transferring money from our joint account to his parents without my knowledge? Please, challenge me on this. I've been handling finances professionally for a decade. Do you really think I haven't documented everything? The room fell silent. They knew I was right. Daniel had always been careless with money, assuming I wasn't paying attention to his occasional loans to his family. But I had noticed every penny, documented every transaction, prepared for this day long before I knew exactly how it would unfold. "You never loved me," Daniel finally said, his voice small and defeated. That hurt, despite everything, because I had loved him once, before I realized that his love for me was conditional upon what I could provide. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "I loved you too much. Enough to cook for your ungrateful family, to fund your sporadic career, to pay for everything while receiving nothing in return. But eventually, I had to start loving myself more." I picked up my bag and my book, ready to leave them in the house that I had paid for, with the furniture I had bought, surrounded by the life I had financed. "The mortgage is paid through the end of the month," I said as I walked to the door. "After that, you're on your own. I suggest you all start looking for jobs. Real ones." I walked out without looking back, ignoring the shouts and curses that followed me. I got into my car, also paid for entirely by me, and drove away from the life I had allowed myself to be trapped in for far too long. In the months that followed, I heard occasional updates about my ex-husband and his family. Daniel had to move back in with his parents as he couldn't afford the mortgage on his own. Sarah actually continued working as a waitress, though at a local restaurant rather than one in Bora Bora. Jake, last I heard, had taken a job at a call center, which he described on social media as soul-crushing capitalist torture, though he seemed to enjoy having his own money for once. As for me, the divorce was finalized with minimal drama. Daniel knew he had no real claim to my assets, and my documentation of his financial misconduct ensured that the judge was sympathetic to my position. I kept the vast majority of our property and investments, walked away debt-free, and started building a new life on my own terms. I moved to a different city, accepted a promotion at work that I had previously turned down because Daniel hadn't wanted to relocate, and began spending my time and money on things that brought me joy rather than appeasing the demands of others. Sometimes I think about the vacation that ended my marriage, and I don't regret a single moment of it. It was expensive, yes, those one-way first-class tickets weren't cheap, but it was worth every penny to finally break free from people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding and free labor. And my ex-in-laws? Last I heard, Sarah still works at that restaurant. She even got promoted to shift manager, though she'd never admit that she's found satisfaction in the capitalist machine she once disdained. Eleanor and Richard had to downsize, selling their house to pay off debts and move into a modest apartment. Jake occasionally sends me friend requests on social media, which I delete without response. As for Daniel, he called me about 6 months after the divorce, drunk and melancholy, asking if we could try again. He said he'd changed, that he understood now what he had lost. I listened politely, then told him what I should have said years ago: no. I guess karma really is a beach, and sometimes you have to be the tide that washes away the people who take you for granted. In the end, I didn't just escape a toxic marriage and family dynamic. I reclaimed my self-worth, my financial independence, and my ability to set boundaries. The $20,000 vacation bill that started it all? Consider it the price of my freedom, and it was the best investment I ever made. Thank you for listening. Comment your thoughts below.